Wednesday, May 13th, 1981, St. Peter's Square. Thousands of devoted followers have gathered to see His Holiness Pope John Paul II for his weekly outdoor mass. But hidden among them is a fugitive, a man with a 9mm pistol and a mission. As John Paul II leans over and lifts a child from the crowd, the fugitive watches closely, eyes locked on his target. The baby is returned to its mother, and a second later, it happens. The shooter tries to flee but is captured. As the world reeled from the shock, questions began to mount. Who was this guy? Was he acting alone? Or was he just a pawn sent by dark forces?
In an age habituated to violence, nothing could have shocked the world more than the news from the Vatican today.
He was operated on all afternoon to treat 5 wounds caused by 3 bullets.
Bir İtalyan mahkemesinde yargılanmayı asla kabul etmeyeceğim.
Somewhere, somebody pulling the strings. This fellow apparently has a very warped mind.
We got to reach out and put a bullet in him.
In the hours after the assassination attempt, Italian authorities identify the gunman.
It has now been established, more or less officially, that his name is Mehmet Ali Ağca.
Mehmet Ali Ağca was a 23-year-old with a murky past. Ağca grew up in the slums of Maltaya, Turkey, where poverty and violence were a way of life. But by his teens, he had found a new family, the Grey Wolves, a far-right extremist group known for drug smuggling, arms trafficking, and political violence.
He had a reputation in high school for being somewhat of a loner. This leads me to think that Ağca was spotted somewhere fairly early as a very promising recruit to terrorism.
By the time he was in university, Ağca had abandoned his studies, but his bank account was mysteriously filled with cash, a small fortune of around $18,000 across multiple deposits. It was clear someone was funding this guy, but who?
Sums of money began moving into bank accounts fairly early in Ağca's career. This is most extraordinary for a student anywhere in the world of modest circumstances.
Then, in February 1979, Ağca committed a crime so shocking it sent his name screaming across newspaper headlines in Turkey. The cold-blooded murder of Abdil İpekçi, a prominent leftist journalist and editor-in-chief of the Turkish newspaper Milliyet.
He was waiting in front of his house, Abdil İpekçi's house. As he came with his car in front of his house, he came out from another car and shot him in cold blood, and Abdil İpekçi was dead in the hospital when he was taken there.
Ağca is caught shortly after and quickly confesses to the crime. He's given a life sentence and housed in Kartal Maltepe prison in Istanbul. Ağca is now one of the most notorious prisoners in Turkey. People are confident he is never going to see the light of day again. How wrong they were. Within 6 months, like Harry Houdini himself, he escapes.
Dönemde ben bakanlıktan ayrılmıştım. Bir gazeteci bana geldi. Kaçmış dedi. Ona hayır kaçmadı, kaçırıldı dedim.
Ağca did leave one clue behind though, a single note. Within it, his strange intentions to kill the Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, if he visited Turkey that year in 1979, as he had planned.
Western imperialists, who fear the formation of a new power, are hastily sending the Crusader commander John Paul disguised as a serious leader to Turkey during a sensitive time. If you and your associates do not cancel his visit now, I will definitely shoot the Pope. The sole reason I escaped from prison was for this, Mehmet Ali Ağca.
The Turkish police took that threat seriously, increasing security. But the Pope was undeterred. JP2 arrived in Turkey as planned on November 28, 1979. And nothing happened. Meanwhile, the fugitive Mehmet Ali Ağca had vanished. Just 60 days after the shooting, Mehmet Ali Ağca was on trial. He confessed immediately, claiming he had acted alone. Then, just as quickly as he confessed, he refused to participate any further.
Bir İtalyan mahkemesinde yargılanmayı asla kabul etmeyeceğim. Bu yüzden hiçbir şeye cevap vermeyeceğim.
For the next 2 days, he refused to leave his cell. But it didn't matter anyway. The jury took just 72 hours to find him guilty, and for the second time in his life, Mehmet Ali Ağca was sentenced to life in prison. Case closed, right? No. Not so fast. Even though Ağca was convicted, nobody really believed his story, the I was working alone story. There were too many inconsistencies, too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. And in truth, the real manhunt was only just starting. Italian investigators knew Ağca didn't act alone. In fact, they smelled a conspiracy, and on November 7th, 1981, they tasked investigating magistrate Ilario Martella with uncovering the truth. But finding the truth wouldn't be easy. Ağca was placed in brutal, solitary confinement. He was silent for months, giving up nothing. No names, no leads. Martella was stuck. Then, something suddenly shifted. Ağca's prison life suddenly got plush. No more solitary confinement. As his conditions improved, Ağca is suddenly open to talk. He drops a bombshell to Martella. He was working with the Bulgarians.
He was brought out, officers directing guards to let him answer our questions. In Italian, he said, "The Bulgarians sent me to Italy."
In Bulgaria, I said several times, have been addressed, trained, special KGB.
Next, from a photo lineup, he picks 3 Bulgarians that he was supposedly working with.
Antonov was with me during attempt.
And Ivatov.
Yes, Ivatov and Kolev. They are my complices.
Then, Martella pulls out a wild card. A snapshot of a man sprinting from St. Peter's Square right after the shooting. Do you know him? He asks. Ağca nods. That's Kolev. Boom! Just like that, the Bulgarian connection was born.
A quel tempo emerse quasi subito, immediatamente, una pista bulgara. E viene fuori dalle stesse dichiarazioni di Ağca.
One key proponent of the Bulgarian connection was American journalist Claire Sterling. The evidence indicates overwhelmingly that the Soviets had decided that Pope John Paul had to go. They then assigned the task to Bulgaria, which in turn commissioned the Turkish mafia, a criminal band subsidized, sponsored, and directed by the Bulgarian security service. But Sterling wasn't just an ordinary journalist. She was considered an expert on Soviet terrorism. The problem is that the media takes information from Sterling's narrative and runs with it. TV specials follow, bold newspaper headlines are published. It became fact in public opinion that the Soviets had done it before there was any real evidence proving so.
But the Soviets were behind it. The Soviets were involved. It was, in particular, it was Bulgaria, the Bulgarian intelligence agencies.
So the world believed that the Kremlin wanted John Paul II dead. But why in the world would that be the case? Well, to understand that, we need to go back to the man himself. Pope John Paul II was born Karol Wojtyła. He was unique as he was the first Polish pope in history. He survived Nazism, endured communism, and chose to dedicate his life to the church.
Communism means the state rules over all, and that faith is frowned upon because that takes you away from the imperative of the good of the people. Your faith is put into the state instead of being put into God.
Immediately after his appointment, John Paul II began his world tour. This was the same world tour that had taken him to Turkey previously. And it was during this world tour that he also returned to his homeland of Poland.
He spends 9 days there, 9 very significant days. He tells people, don't listen to what the government says about you. You're Poles, you're Christians, you have a certain dignity that the state does not uphold.
Macht ist auch eine Macht, aber ist nicht die einzige Macht. Es gibt eine Macht, von der man sagen kann, das ist die Macht des Menschen selbst.
This lit a spark that led the Polish people to resist communism.
Then one day, as he stood in front of hundreds of thousands of Poles leading an outdoor mass, something crazy happened.
że nie może być Europy sprawiedliwej bez Polski niepodległej na jej mapie.
People who had gathered en masse began to sing, "We want God, we want God." What could the authorities do? The Pope's assistant whispers to him after a number of minutes, "Perhaps we should put an end to this." And the Pope said back, No, this is why I came.
Shortly after, the Solidarity movement was born, the first independent trade union in the Soviet bloc.
There are strikes. The workers are demanding a union, and the Pope supports them. Unions and totalitarian systems can't coexist. The two don't go together.
Well, the Russians face in the Polish case a tremendous threat to the empire. If Poland goes independent, if freedom really gets a toehold in Poland, there's no telling where it may lead, and this threatens the entire Soviet system.
Can you imagine how the Soviets felt watching JP2 rally the Polish people like that? And it definitely seemed that there was a strong motive for why the Soviets wanted him dead. But convicting them, on the other hand, would prove much more difficult. After 4 years of investigations, the case against Mehmet Ali Ağca and his alleged Bulgarian handlers finally went to trial in May 1985. In addition to the 3 Bulgarians named by Ağca, 3 Turkish men associated with the Grey Wolves also stood accused. The leading theory was simple. The Soviets ordered the hit, Bulgaria pulled the trigger, and Ağca was their hired gun. But what about his history with the ultra-nationalist right and the Grey Wolves? Just a cover to shield the Soviets? Journalist Claire Sterling and others argued that Ağca had been a Soviet asset for a while, every move orchestrated by his KGB handlers. It all seemed airtight, at least on paper. But there was one big problem. On the very first day of the trial, the star witness, Mehmet Ali Ağca, started acting insane.
The prosecution's main witness in the purported plot to kill Pope John Paul II repeated in testimony today that he was Jesus Christ and that the world was about to end.
Then the contradictions began piling up, with Ağca frequently changing key details, even within minutes. Over time, he walked back several major claims, including one bombshell on a major piece of evidence: the man in the photo. Ağca identified the man seen running from St. Peter's Square as Kolev, his accomplice. However, when reporters saw the man in person at a press conference in Sofia, they realized he looked nothing like the man in the image. 3 days later, Ağca retracted his claim, admitting Kolev was never in the square. This pattern of shifting stories seriously weakened the prosecution's case.
Ağca era uno che recitava benissimo e quindi in un certo senso ha giocato molti inquirenti, molti uomini delle polizie giudiziarie e addirittura anche l'opinione pubblica.
By 1986, the tide began to turn. After 4 years, hundreds of testimonies, and a global media frenzy, the case imploded. On March 29th, 1986, the verdict was in. The jury acquitted the Bulgarians and the Turks, citing a lack of evidence. The Bulgarian connection had collapsed. The trial of the decade had ended in humiliation. And even worse, people were now more uncertain than ever as to who had ordered the hit. If the Soviets really wanted the Pope dead and to keep their hands clean and keep out of it, would they really hire Mehmet Ali Ağca, a mentally unstable fugitive who was on Interpol's red list?
In effetti poi alla fine di queste nostre ricerche e discorsi, che i bulgari fossero i mandanti, gli organizzatori dell'attentato e che alle loro spalle ci fosse il KGB sovietico è una tesi che è andata scemando, quasi scomparsa in un certo senso. Non credo che qualcuno voglia riesumarla.
The thing that bothers me is it credible that the Soviets would really such bunglers as to let the Bulgarians take such a prominent role in running this operation? The Bulgarians, of course, being so closely tied to the Russians historically and in every other way, and being associated with the Russians in the public mind. It is not very much of a cover, of a protection It does not really give the Soviets much of an excuse. And were the Soviets really willing to accept this kind of risk?
Plus, the hit was a shit show. He failed his mission, he didn't escape, and he had no cover story. This is just not how the KGB operated. And that's because the Soviets didn't hire Ağca. But there is another theory on who did. Before Mehmet Ali Ağca ever set foot in St. Peter's Square, he had spent years immersed in Turkey's far-right underground. As a teenager, his school was taken over by the Nationalist Movement Party, and all of his close friends were right-wing extremists. By university, he had abandoned his studies, but his bank account mysteriously filled with money. He was paid for a life of crime, including the horrific murder of Abdülipeki, all orchestrated by the Grey Wolves. And the Grey Wolves didn't just inspire him, they protected him, they trained him, and they were the ones responsible for breaking him out of prison. In 1982, 3 members of the Grey Wolves were sentenced to prison for helping Ağca escape. Then in 1979, Ağca sends the note, that infamous note to Milliyet. In it were his intentions to kill the Pope. And yet, in that note, Ağca used a very specific phrase that was overlooked. He called the Pope a Crusader commander, a deeply loaded and derogatory term in the Muslim world. This phrasing was no coincidence. Just months before Ağca's escape, Her Gün, the official newspaper of the MHP, ran an article referring to the Pope with the exact same phrase, Crusader commander, framing his visit to Turkey as a Christian imperialist invasion. Ağca wasn't acting alone. He was just absorbing and repeating the very ideology that had trained him since he was a young child. While the world believed that Bulgaria had sent an assassin, in reality, the real truth was hiding in plain sight. This wasn't a KGB operation. This wasn't a Soviet plot. This was a Turkish ultra-nationalist hit job. Revenge against the Pope who dared to push Catholicism into the Muslim world.
The CIA got a new director, William Casey, who was an extreme right-wing ideologue and wanted a strong statement that the Soviets were involved in international terrorism, which we couldn't substantiate. The evidence was not there. Then he wanted a special assessment on the fact that the Soviets were involved in the plot to kill the Pope. And again, the evidence was not only not there in terms of credible evidence, but there was very good evidence that the Soviets were not only totally uninvolved, but they had warned the Bulgarians that they had picked up some evidence of right-wing groups, particularly out of Turkey, that could be involved in something like this, and to keep your distance.
I lupi grigi hanno pensato che, essendo loro un gruppo ultranazionalista, anti-europeo, islamico, fortemente anticattolico, allora la personalità migliore da colpire era quella di Giovanni Paolo II.
On December 27, 1983, inside the walls of Rome's Rebibbia prison, Pope John Paul II did something few people could understand. He walked into the cell of a man who had tried to kill him and forgave him. Afterwards, in a final plot twist, he said he never believed Bulgaria was behind the plot.
I can add that the Holy Father, while meeting with the President, he expressed his view on this topic. And he literally said, I never believed in the so-called Bulgarian connection.
The assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II was shrouded in lies and mystery and deception. But it's not the only regime that operates in the shadows. North Korea's crimes go far deeper than most people realize. If you want to uncover the truth, you should watch my previous video.